Welcome to Let's Talk About It, a social work podcast. I am your host, Edward Parati Sousas. I would like to thank you for joining me today for our very first episode on a 10-episode series focusing on Black veterans' experiences within the Veterans Administration, or VA. Let me take a minute to introduce myself. I am a current doctoral candidate at Simmons University's Doctor of Social Work program, in which my degree will be conferred on January 30th, 2026. I hold my Master's of Social Work from the University at Albany, and I am a licensed clinical social worker with 10 plus years of postgraduate working experience in community mental health and within private practice. I have worked as both a clinician in the field and as a program director overseeing staff, training, clinical supervision, and supervising interns, molding new generations of social workers. My promise this season is simple. Center Black veterans' lived expertise, match those stories to strong research, and push for fixes you can actually see and feel. Before we jump in, I want to read a brief positionality statement, because how I show up matters. I am a white, heterosexual man who is currently middle class, and I grew up in a multicultural family living in poverty. I am also a combat veteran who served 10 years in the Army. Those identities and experiences shape how I move through institutions and how institutions respond to me. My whiteness, gender, professional status, veteran status, and current class position can afford me access and credibility that Black veterans are too often denied. My early life in poverty within a multicultural family taught me precarity, code switching, and the ways systems label, surveil, and sort people. I carry both privilege and proximity to hardship. In this project, I commit to anti-racist, trauma-informed practice, to crediting Black veterans as authoritative knowers rather than subjects, and to sharing power through co-design, consent, and the right to review or withdraw stories. My role is a facilitator and learner, not an arbiter. I'll use this platform to name structural harms rather than pathologize individuals, and stay accountable by grounding episodes in peer-reviewed evidence. Here's the truth. Black veterans did their part. They were given promises of equity, equality, and access. They served, they sacrificed, and they came home. And the system didn't always show up for them to follow through on those promises. Today, we're going to name what's broken, connect dots across the research, and talk about fixes we can actually build together. If you've ever felt invisible in a clinic, watched a claim derail over a paperwork glitch, or not being able to make it to an exam due to limitations and freedom to schedule around you, or if you sat in an examiner's office who seemed to decide your story before you spoke, well, this series is for you. And when I say research, I mean peer-reviewed studies combined with real-world data. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to introduce our Black Veteran Advisory Panel who will co-construct this season with me. This is not just a symbolic inclusion of tokenism, but real shared power distributed equally to the panel. The panel will decide which content gets delivered, how that content is delivered, and identify what is important to their community. Why do this? Because if I'm going to dedicate an entire series on the lived experiences of Black veterans within the VA, I need Black veterans to confirm those experiences and identify what is most important to their community. This is not about what I want. It is about what this community needs, and I'm not the person who can answer that. This is the foundation of this project and a commitment to anti-racist practice and the centering of those most affected. Although I am a veteran, I am a white veteran, and though I share similar experiences as Black veterans, my experiences are not the same. My needs are not the same, and my considerations are not the same. Only Black veterans know what they need, so Black veterans are going to work with me hand in hand to ensure those needs are brought to the forefront. I would like to take a moment to personally thank them for their time and dedication to this project and ensuring the quality of the content meets the needs for their community. So let's jump in. I want to define the problem our season tackles as clearly as possible. We're talking about why Black veterans face worse experiences and outcomes within VA care and benefits, even when the need is the same or higher. And I'll ground this in research, in plain language with quick examples so it's unmistakable. Here's the short version. The system doesn't just have a few bad days, it has patterns. Across large studies, Black veterans report more dismissals and visits, lower satisfaction with disability exams, lower odds of getting benefits after a PTSD diagnosis, and smaller gains from PTSD treatment programs. Those are multiple points in the pipeline, not one moment. So let's break the pipeline down. First, the very first touch, trying to get seen. Studies on perceived discrimination and communication demonstrate how a visit's tone, explanations, and being believed shape everything that follows. In pain care, veterans describe shorter explanations and feeling unheard, which maps to lower trust and more satisfaction. This is demonstrated in identifying healthcare experiences associated with perceived racial ethnic discrimination among veterans with pain by Huseman et al. In 2020. When people feel dismissed at step 1, they disengage, or they come in defensive for the next step. Second, documentation and options. A qualitative study by Carey et al. In 2023 captured the phrase, "I wasn't presented with other options," and highlighted how choice and informed consent can fall away, especially for women navigating sensitive decisions. When options aren't laid out in plain language, people don't just lose autonomy, they lose faith in the plan. And that shows up later when they have to recount what happened in exams and claims. Third, the compensation and pension exams. A study of exam satisfaction conducted by Rosen et al. In 2013 found that examiner behavior, like listening, clarity, and respect, was strongly tied to satisfaction among Black veterans. That's the heart of it. Trust is not abstract, it's how the conversation goes. And when the conversation goes wrong, the veteran leaves without confidence that their record reflects their reality. Fourth, the bureaucracy, scheduling and logistics. Rescheduled or missed appointments can get coded as no-shows, and evidence can be marked incomplete, which stacks the deck against an approval. In a study of MST-related PTSD service connection by Weberman et al. In 2024, process gaps like missed exams and incomplete evidence were associated with higher denial odds. That's not personal failing, it's a system failing. Fifth, the decision phase. Looking at PTSD specifically, Red et al. In 2020 found Black veterans were less likely to be awarded benefits after diagnosis compared to white veterans, despite being diagnosed at a higher rate and with higher severity compared to white veterans. A federal review conducted by the Government Accountability Office, or GAO, in 2023 echoed disparities across common conditions and urged the VA to improve data quality and study causes. Outside the VA, research by Gotland et al. In 2023 on Social Security disability shows gaps shrink when people are represented, meaning navigating and standardized criteria matter. Sixth, treatment outcomes. Even after entering care, Black veterans in VA residential PTSD programs saw smaller symptom gains and more depression reoccurrence, according to Gross et al. In 2021. That's a signal about fit and relationship. The flip side, proactive outreach can raise engagement into PTSD care for both Black and white veterans, as found by Steckler et al. In 2016. Yet, despite Black veterans' increased propensity to seek PTSD care, they are less likely to finish treatment or gain from treatment in comparison to white veterans. This is not a case where Black veterans are avoiding treatment, so we cannot blame this as a causation. Despite empirical evidence of Black-bodied individuals' avoidance in seeking treatment due to historical racial trauma and repeated harm, which we will discuss further in episode 2, that sentiment is not replicated when you add the intersecting identity as a veteran, where evidence shows a higher propensity for help seeking within the VA. The VA has clearly increased its outreach to Black veterans, which this highlights, but despite these efforts, no change has occurred in outcomes, pointing to something more deeply embedded into the system that is trying to support them. So what ties these pieces together? The literature points to 3 big drivers: structural racism, communication and climate, and data and accountability. Structural racism is about rules and routines, not just attitudes. It shows up in where clinics are, how transportation support works, who gets telehealth equipment, and which metrics leaders are judged on. According to Bailey et al. In 2017, if you don't actively counter it, neutral-sounding processes recreate old inequities. Communication and climate are about how care is delivered. We have direct evidence that implicit bias in provider communication correlates with worse patient experience as found by Higuera et al. In 2019. And we know exam satisfaction hinges on feeling heard and respected, as shown by Rosen et al. In 2013. Representation also matters. There are too few Black clinicians, especially in primary care, and that limits culturally resonant care. And this is found by Snyder et al. In 2023. Additionally, cultural considerations and historical trauma are not accounted for and examined in how they impact Black veteran populations and how they show up as barriers to access of care. And because they are not looked for, they are not seen, and ultimately they are not countered, leaving Black veterans at a disadvantage disguised as a neutral policy. Data and accountability are about whether we can see the problem and fix it. Right now, data access is heavily gated. Privacy is essential, but when outside researchers can't replicate analysis, blind spots persist. The GAO urged improvements in race ethnicity data quality and deeper causal work. The solution is secure data enclaves with pre-registered analysis, public data dictionaries, and community advisory power, so we build data with Black veterans, not on them. Now, there are two more issues we have to name: intersectionality and pooling. Intersectionality means race doesn't act alone. Gender, disability, and nativity shape experiences in ways that add up and interact. Black women's experiences in care and in claims are not the same as Black men's. Power, safety, and consent are front and center. And Black nativity matters too. US born and foreign born Black Americans can have different health patterns due to different histories and exposures. If we don't model those intersections, we miss where harm actually lands. Pooling is when we lump all minorities together. It can hide the specific barriers Black veterans face, like distrust rooted in history, communication gaps, or differences in how lay evidence is weighed. Work on Black minority and ethnic populations show that pooling masks needs and leads to generic solutions that don't fit. For Black veterans, we need targeted research and tailored fixes. Where does diversity, equity, and inclusion fit in? When DEI infrastructures are strong, equity is measured and managed. Leaders see access and satisfaction by intersecting identities such as race, class, sexual identity, disability. Coaching is on the calendar, and pipelines for Black clinicians are supported. When DEI gets stripped out, those routines vanish and gaps quietly widen. We see the downstream effects in exam satisfaction and communication, in implementation fidelity, in representation, and in system patterns unless countered. DEI isn't a poster. It's the plumbing that keeps equity flowing. Let me show you how these drivers connect using a claim story. Two veterans come home from the same deployment with similar symptoms. One meets an examiner who says, "I believe you," explains options, and documents thoroughly. Logistics are handled, and the veteran gets a timely decision and a clear treatment plan. The other one hits rushed visits, confusing scheduling, and a rescheduled exam recorded as a no-show. The denial cites insufficient evidence, even though the symptoms didn't change. These splits aren't random. They trace the pattern in the literature. This isn't just about symptoms, it's about quality of life and dignity. Measures of health-related quality of life remind us to track sleep, pain, work, relationships, and spiritual well-being, not just scores. Trust belongs on the dashboard next to approval rates, wait times, and symptom changes. So to define the problem in one sentence, Black veterans face avoidable barriers and worse outcomes across multiple VA touchpoints because structural rules, communication climates, representation gaps, and data gatekeeping keep inequity in motion, and because our research tools have not always centered their realities. That's the problem, clearly named. First, we need a lens. For the purpose of this podcast, we'll be looking through the lens of critical race theory, or CRT. Critical race theory is a powerful lens for understanding Black veterans' experiences within the VA. And I'm going to define this through the work of D'Agato and Stefanik 2023 and Kowalski et al. 2014. First, a clean definition. CRT is a way of seeing how racism is baked into rules and routines, not just individual attitudes. It says racism isn't rare. It's ordinary in systems unless we actively counter it. Core ideas include racism is ordinary, the limits of colorblind policy, the importance of counter storytelling, centering people whose voices have been sidelined, and intersectionality, which shows how race combines with gender, disability, class, or nativity in real lives. This isn't a partisan slogan, it's a set of tools. So why CRT here? Because the data shows patterns at multiple points in the VA pipeline. Lower satisfaction with disability exams, process gaps like missed exams and incomplete evidence linked to higher denial odds, lower award odds for claims, and smaller gains in residential PTSD treatment for Black veterans. Critical race theory helps us ask the right questions. What policies, workflows, and cultural habits produce these outcomes? And how do we redesign them? Critical race theory provides a framework in examining structures of power that create and maintain racial inequalities to develop strategies for change. CRT began in the 1970s as a collective of lawyers, activists, and legal scholars once the civil rights movement of the 1960s had stalled and began being rolled back. CRT is a response to the subtle forms of racism that are not apparent and ingrained structurally into the fabric of our system and culture that continue to marginalize people of color through the act of colorblindness, colonization, and Eurocentric views and ideologies. Let's walk through 5 critical race theory principles and how they apply on the ground. The first tenet is racism is ordinary, not exceptional. Less apparent forms of racism systemically interwoven into society through policies, laws, and practices that are constructed around the dominant group as everyday practice. Formal rules that demand colorblind treatment will be able to remedy only the most flagrant forms of racism, making less apparent forms invisible because no one is looking at them. In healthcare, neutral-sounding rules can still produce unequal results. Clinic locations, transportation support, health equipment, or scheduling rules. A national review shows structural forces drive health gaps unless they are actively addressed. This was found by Bailey et al. In 2017. In a VA frame, think about how no-show codes or documentary standards can quietly penalize veterans who are juggling work, trauma symptoms, or caretaking, especially if those burdens fall unequally. The second tenet of CRT is interest convergence or material determinism. Racism can serve the interests of both white elites and working class individuals. As a result, there is often little motivation to eliminate it. A notable illustration of this can be seen in Brown versus the Board of Education case, where Derek Bell proposed the hypothesis that one of the most significant victories in race-related legal remedies stem from the self-interests of white elites. These elites were concerned about maintaining a positive image of the United States during the Cold War, rather than experiencing a sudden moral awakening. This preoccupation emerged at a time when the US was competing with the Soviet Union for support among the uncommitted nations of the developing world, many of which were predominantly Black, Brown, or Asian. Within the VA, we see that when political forces pushed for DEI measures, the VA began to track equity measures and invest in task force focused on investigating disparities. When DEI mandates were reversed in 2025, the VA dissolved all equity-driven programs entirely, affecting not only data but training implementations, supports for marginalized employees, and pipelines to bring in minority professionals and leaders. The third tenet is the social construction of race and differential racialization. Race is considered a product of social thought. While individuals with shared origins may exhibit certain traits such as skin color, physique, or hair texture, these characteristics represent only a minuscule portion of our genetic diversity. Research indicates that there is more genetic variation within racial groups than between them. The social construction of race serves as a mechanism for the uneven distribution of power among society's members based on the perceived color of skin. In the United States, race profoundly influences the definitions of being white or non-white. Additionally, the concept of differential racialization highlights how the dominant group racializes various minority groups in distinct ways and at different times, often in response to changing societal needs. Examples of this can be seen today with the media and ICE campaigns painting all Black and brown immigrants as criminals, dangerous, and other negative qualities, yet painting predominantly white immigrants, such as those from the Ukraine, as refugees of war. This is the same tactic used to paint the black population during the War on Drugs campaign in a negative way, while responding to the opioid epidemic that predominantly affected middle class white bodied individuals in a more empathetic and positive way. The fourth tenet is intersectionality and anti essentialism. No person has a single, easily stated unitary identity. Everyone has potentially conflicting, overlapping identities. Race is not something you have or don't have. Black women, black men, foreign born black veterans, these experiences aren't interchangeable. Intersectionality shows how race, gender, nativity, disability, and sexual orientation interact to shape care and benefits. Studies find, for example, that some women have reported not being offered full options or clear consent in sensitive care decisions, which erodes trust. The fifth tenet is voice of color and counter storytelling. Early writers believed in the need to develop a voice of color and in the naming of one's own reality. White male politicians creating policy and laws will not consider the unique needs and experiences of other groups. Policies that insist we treat everyone the same can miss the fact that people start in different places and face different obstacles. Communication research shows that style of interaction like listening, clarity, and teachback affect perceived discrimination and satisfaction. A colorblind script won't fix this. Coaching and accountability will. CRT says that you can't see the whole picture without the people most affected telling their story and shaping the agenda. In research, that means Black authoritative knowledge or Black veterans' lived expertise to help define problems and solutions. Practically, that looks like Black veteran advisory panels with agenda setting power, not just comment time. Structural change beats individual blame. Critical race theory directs attention to policies and metrics. Representation in the workforce is one structural lever. There are too few Black clinicians and leaders in healthcare, which affects cultural resonance and continuity. Another lever is data and transparency. The GAO urged the VA to improve race, ethnicity data, quality, and study causes of benefits disparities. CRT treats data as political, asking who is counted, which variables get collected, and who decides what counts as evidence. Let's take a concrete example through a CRT lens. Let's use the C&P exam. Research links examiner communication and respect to satisfaction for Black veterans. Critical race theory asks what policy ensures that respect is the default. That could be standardized protocols with teachbacks, coaching and direct observation, and a requirement to document how lay evidence was considered. Then you post facility level results on satisfaction and timeliness by race and other intersecting identifiers. That's how a lens turns into a lever. Change the rule, track the metric. But wait, isn't CRT just about history? Well, history matters. Mistrust isn't abstract. Consider the U.S. Public Health Service's Tuskegee syphilis study, a 40-year government study that withheld effective treatment from Black men with syphilis. Critical race theory says we should recognize that history and design today's systems to earn trust through transparency, consent, and shared power, rather than just asking patients, well, get over it. What changes when we use CRT with this podcast mission? Well, three things. Questions change. We stop asking, why did this veteran not comply? And ask, what in the process made compliance harder for this veteran? Measure change. We add trust, dignity, and health-related quality of life to dashboards alongside wait times and approval rates. Power shifts. Black veterans help set the agenda, from study questions to clinic hours to how decisions get explained. Okay, how do I do CRT well? First, name the mechanisms. Map the benefits and care pipeline and circle where inequity shows up. Exams, scheduling, evidence handling, decisions, or even follow-up. 2. Change the rules. Standardize respectful communication, such as teachbacks and repeating back questions to identify understanding. Document how lay evidence is weighed and schedule proactive outreach. 3. Build the dashboard. Post timelines, satisfaction, approvals, and attrition by race. Pair them with trust and quality of life metrics. 4. Share power. Resource a Black veteran advisory panel with a vote on pilots and messaging. 5. Protect the pipeline. Invest in diversity through recruitment, mentorship, and retention of Black clinicians and leaders. Treat representation as a quality metric. To land the plane here, critical race theory is a lens that helps us see the system clearly and fix what it's doing, on purpose or by habit. It keeps us focused on structures, not blame, on stories and statistics, on power shared and not borrowed, and that's exactly what Black veterans deserve from the VA. This last segment is about the gaps, where current efforts fall short for Black veterans and how this show will try to fill those gaps. No checklists, no forms, no live call-ins. This season is pre-recorded and drops all at once. Our lane is conversation, education, and centering Black veterans' voices so the problems are undeniable and the ideas for change are clear. Let's name the gaps plainly. Backed by research, translated into everyday language. Gap 1. We don't measure the structure. Too often, equity focuses on attitudes instead of rules and routines. Think clinic locations, transportation help, telehealth equipment, scheduling rules, and what counts as no-show. A national review argues that unless you measure these structural pieces, inequity quietly reproduces itself. Gap 2. Interactions matter, but we rarely make them consistent. Black veterans report lower satisfaction with disability exams when communication feels rushed or dismissive, and perceived discrimination in clinical conversations track with worse experiences. We don't reliably build the trust behaviors into daily practice. Gap 3. Process glitches become denials. Missed or rescheduled compensation and pension appointments can be coded as no-shows, evidence can be incomplete, and instruction can be unclear. These are boring words with real consequences. Missed exams and incomplete evidence are associated with higher denial odds. Pair that with the findings of Read It All, and it's clear the process isn't neutral. Gap 4. Outcomes lag because programs don't always fit. Even after entering care, Gross et al. In 2021 showed that Black veterans in residential PTSD programs showed smaller gains and more depression reoccurrence. Outreach helps people start care, but it isn't consistently built in and it doesn't guarantee equitable results. Gap 5. Research flattens identities and silences voices. Studies still lump groups together like BME or minority, masking specific needs. Black nativity and health disparities show health patterns can differ from US-born to foreign-born Black Americans. Intersectionality tells us race, gender, disability, and nativity interact. Qualitative work shows people aren't always offered real options. We also know it's hard for folks to participate in research without support like time, transportation, or childcare, and history weighs on trust. Gap 6. Data gatekeeping and weak transparency. Privacy is essential, but when outside scholars can't replicate findings, blind spots will persist. The GAO urged better race, ethnicity data quality and deeper causal study on benefits disparities. Without credible outside eyes and plain language feedback to communities, it's easy for problems to be undercounted or explained away. Gap 7. Representation and climate. There are too few Black clinicians in primary care roles and too few Black leaders. Climate shapes trust and follow through, and it's still unclear how the removal of DEI will impact this. However, history can shed some light on that. Gap 8. We don't track what matters to people, trust and quality of life. Even when metrics look green, trust can be low and daily life unchanged. Black men's health-related quality of life by Whipple et al. In 2024 argues for measuring mental, physical, social, and spiritual well-being. If you don't measure trust and quality of life, you can hit your metrics and still miss. Now, how will this podcast try to fill those gaps? Remember, this is a pre-recorded show. We're using conversation to make the invisible visible and to offer ideas you can adapt, backed by research. Our approach in 3 moves. Move 1. Education that translates the evidence. We stitch together studies and explain them in plain language. So patterns across claims, exams, and treatment aren't separate puzzles. When we say structure, you'll hear examples: what a no-show code does, why documentation language matters, where dignity is lost or gained. We'll name articles on air so you can find them later. Move 2. Center Black authoritative knowledge. This season elevates Black veterans' lived expertise. Stories aren't window dressing, they are evidence and show how policies land. We pair those stories with the research so the why becomes clear. You'll hear experiences across intersections because one label never captures a life. Move 3. Offer ideas for different roles, no assignments. We won't hand you a to-do list. We'll share ideas to consider because what works depends on your setting. If you are a Black veteran, you'll hear ways to frame your story so it's heard, moments where asking for clarification can change the record, and reminders that you are not responsible for fixing the system that harmed you. If you're a clinician, you'll hear how opening a visit, explaining options, and using teachbacks can be the difference between mistrust and momentum, habits supported by communication research. If you're a leader, you'll learn why protecting DEI or the plumbing and making the right numbers visible changes outcomes, because equity lives in operations, not slogans. What we won't do: we won't measure what listeners do after they listen. We won't provide checklists, claim maps, or handouts. This season is pre-recorded by design so you can hear the full arc, history, mechanisms, lived experiences, and ideas without waiting week to week. What we hope happens: we hope Black veterans hear themselves and feel less alone. We hope clinicians hear practical ways to build trust in the room. We hope leaders hear where structure is failing people and feel the nudge to move the levers that they control. And we hope everyone walks away with language to name the problem, because once you can name it, you can change it. Before we close today, I want to slow down and speak directly to how I hope you'll listen to this season, especially if you're a white-bodied listener or if you work in or around the VA system. If, at any point, you notice yourself getting tense, feeling defensive, or thinking, that's not how it is where I work, or I'm not like that, I want you to know that reaction makes sense. When we talk about racism, inequity, and harm in systems we care about, it can feel like an attack on us personally, on our character, on everything we think we are doing right. So here's my invitation. When those feelings show up, don't shut this episode off. Don't turn away. Just notice the reaction, take a breath, and stay with me. Put a little space between the feeling and what you choose to do next. Because this season is not designed to shame you, call you a bad person, or declare that your whole career has been harmful. That's not the work we're doing here. This is not a season designed to attack the VA or the people who work inside it. It's a season designed to center the voices of Black veterans and to lean into uncomfortable conversations with the support of data and empirical research. We are going to talk about patterns, structures, and histories that produce inequitable outcomes, even when the individual people inside the system care deeply and are doing the best they can with what they have. What you'll hear in this series is fact-based, not opinion-based. We're going to look at federal reports, peer-reviewed studies, and decades of documentation alongside what Black veterans have been saying about their experiences. Feelings absolutely matter. Stories absolutely matter. But we're not relying on feelings alone. We are bringing lived experience and research into the same room and asking, what does this tell us about how the system is working and for whom? I also want to honor something that often goes unsaid. There are thousands of people who work at the VA who genuinely have the best interests of veterans at heart. I want to say that again. There are thousands of people inside the system who stay late, who lose sleep, who carry their patients home in their minds and in their hearts because they truly care. I don't believe anyone wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to be inequitable toward a black veteran. That's not how racism and inequity usually work. They show up in policies, practices, wait lists, exam procedures, pain assessments, benefit formulas, and the countless small decisions that add up over time. They show up when a system was not built with black veterans at the center, and then never fully redesigned with them at the center. And I also know there are many VA care providers and staff who feel like their hands are tied. Maybe the workload is overwhelming. Maybe the rules are rigid. Maybe you've wanted to do more, spend more time, ask more questions, push a little harder, but you felt boxed in by policy, productivity targets, or the culture of your workplace. If you've ever thought, I see a problem, but I don't know how to change it, this season is for you too. Because the VA, as a health and benefits system, is built on research based approaches. Evidence matters here, guidelines matter here. That's one of the strengths of the system. So, my goal in this podcast is to bring forward the research that speaks directly to Black veterans' experiences, research about disparities, about pain care, about disability ratings, and about trust and mistrust, and put it right where the VA can see it and use it. I'm not just saying things feel unfair. I'm saying here's what Black veterans are describing, here's what the data shows, and here's where those two things line up. I'm presenting the VA and its leaders with the evidence they need to change their approach, to update their practices, and to honor Black veterans by following through on the promises that were made to them. My hope is that as you listen, you leave each episode with three things. One, the ability to name the problem. Not just something's wrong, but language for what is wrong. Whether that's racial disparities in pain treatment, differences in benefit approvals, or structural barriers that make it harder for Black veterans to access what they've earned. When we can name the problem clearly, we are stronger advocates, better colleagues, and more accountable leaders. Two, a sense of how to co-create solutions with Black veteran communities. Not solutions that are dreamed up for Black veterans without them, but solutions developed with them by listening deeply, sharing power, and valuing Black authoritative knowledge. That might mean changing how we run a clinic, how we communicate, how we collect feedback, or how we measure success. Three, the courage and tools to nudge the VA toward more equitable care. That may look different depending on your role. If you are a frontline provider, it might mean changing how you ask questions or how you advocate in your team huddles. If you're in leadership, it might mean adjusting policies, allocating resources differently, or reconsidering what quality means when equity is truly on the table. If you are a veteran, it might mean feeling more confident naming what you need, organizing with others, or asking for accountability. I want this information to be useful, not just interesting. I want it to feel like something you can carry into your next appointment, your next staff meeting, your next supervision, your next policy conversation. I hope it gives you language, frameworks, and evidence you can point to when you say, we need to do better by Black veterans, and here's why. For providers, staff, and leaders inside the VA, my hope is that this season gives you tools, concrete tools, to deliver the highest quality of equitable care. Care that doesn't depend on a veteran's race, where they live, who happens to pick up their chart, or how well they know how to navigate the system. Care that consistently honors Black veterans' humanity, service, and sacrifice. If we do this right, the VA has the potential to become a standard setter, a model for other institutions across the country and around the world. Imagine a VA where Black veterans don't brace themselves before walking through the door, where trust is rebuilt not through slogans but through consistent, lived experience of equity, where other systems look to the VA and say, that's how you do veteran-centered, racially just care. That's the vision I'm holding as we move through this season together. So as you listen, especially if you are a white-bodied, especially if you have power or privilege inside the VA, I'm asking you to stay open. Notice where you feel defensive, and instead of arguing with the story in your head, get curious. What might this veteran be showing me about the system? What might this data be inviting me to rethink? What could I do differently given what I'm learning? And if you're a Black veteran listening, I want you to say this clearly. This podcast is offered in honor of you. Your service, your sacrifice, your wisdom, your patience, and your right to receive care and benefits that are as strong, as timely, and as respectful as anyone else's. You should not have to fight twice, once in uniform and once at the VA, to get what you were promised. If the VA truly wants to put veterans first, it has to be able to honor all veterans equally, not just in mission statements and posters, but in data and outcomes and day-to-day experiences at every doorway of the system. That's the bar, that's the work, and that's the purpose of this season and this podcast. I'm Edward, and I want to thank you for spending this time with me today. In our next episode, we're going to step back and look at how we got here, the history, the policies, and the patterns that shape today's mistrust and disparities. My hope is that by understanding that bigger picture will help all of us see the path forward more clearly and move us closer to a VA that truly keeps its promise to Black veterans. Make sure you like this episode and the series. Follow the channel and share with your community, a battle buddy, a colleague you think would benefit from this information, or a leader you think should hear this. Help us get the voices of the Black veteran community out there so that it's so loud it can't be ignored. I will see you all in the next episode.